So first of all, everyone, my name is Yaniv Bardayan. I am the CEO and co-founder of Balkan Cyber, a company that was born out of vulnerability management, and specifically the process of orchestrating and orchestrating the process of remediation of vulnerabilities. We started from CVEs, but today the term vulnerabilities is no longer unanimous with CVEs. It's actually way broader, as we have seen from the latest analysis, of the latest report by David. I think the main thing that I see, I'm not sure if everyone can see my screen yet. Sorry. Yeah. Now here we go. The main thing that we see here as we go in is that unlike something like 7 to 8 years ago, where we scanned our infrastructures and environments in very particular places by very particular products, today in 2022, across multiple attack surfaces, we deploy multiple scanners that are scanning the same environments from different angles. The result of that is not only that we have more UIs to walk through and more vulnerabilities to attend to, it's also the data is becoming duplicated, harder to understand and put in context, harder to connect to assets and to connect to owners. And the entire process that was never easy per se is not only becoming more complicated, but actually becoming more dependent on multiple people, multiple processes, multiple tools, and multiple teams. This creates a world where if we want to manage our vulnerabilities appropriately, we have to work across multiple platforms in a way that is just unscalable, not even to the smallest environments or by the largest teams. Now, I think the main question when we look at it is why. Even in the past, when we had only one vendor that scanned our infrastructure, we still had the challenges. And the challenges, as we learn in Vulcan also from the survey, is a challenge first and foremost of data and ownership. Now, these things are tied in directly together, both in the old world where vulnerabilities and CVEs were the same, and in the new world where a vulnerability might be a misconfigured SaaS application or an open misconfigured S3 bucket. The issue is that not only that we need to tie the data together to multiple data points that exist in different areas of the enterprise. It could be the CMDB or the ownership database. It could be different ITSM or SDLC management tools down to different scanners. It's also about the fact that ownership became more democratized. It's not that one IT person or one IT team are owning a machine or an infrastructure. Different people have different ownership structures, or different organizations have different ownership structures on the same, sometimes assets, the same applications, the same pieces of code. And the process of just finding the right person to assign a remediation task is becoming very, very complicated. Now, us as security practitioners, we have the full program responsibility and ownership. We can see that clearly from the survey. No matter how mature you are, no matter who you are, the perception of who owns the overall vulnerability management program is always associated, or in vast majority of cases, associated with security. Also, vulnerability and risk analysis is associated with security almost directly across both traditional as well as more modern attack surfaces. But when it comes to remediation, it almost always not security. It's almost always dependent on the person that is owning the asset, owning the application, responsible in particular software, had written the code, or is managing the organization that had written the code, while security are responsible in providing the insights, reporting, assigning, sometimes giving paths towards resolution, and eventually overseeing that something is solved in a certain period of time. And this is where we, in our perception, try to tie in the data with the ownership aspect of it, and try to provide better tools for customers, as well as different enterprises, to actually find the right people, feed them with the best data we can feed them, and help them eventually achieve what is our responsibility and what we are held accountable on. Now, when we look at it, it doesn't matter how big of an organization you are or how small. as I said, in most of the cases, security are not the ones that remediate. Security are the ones that assign tasks for remediation. And they are eventually walking away to other teams, sometimes in different geographies, different territories, using different tools. Some teams wants to get their as David said, wants to get their insights in Teams or Slack, others in the form of a ticket in ServiceNow, some in Jira, some through email. Doesn't really matter. We as security people have to collaborate and align ourselves to the other team's processes, because we're just one stakeholder of their time versus many other stakeholders in the organization, like product people and others that are competing on the same resources as us. And we have to govern our side of the process, just like product managers are governing their side of the process, or auditors are governing their side of the process, and so on and so forth. At least for us, as we look at this survey, we have a couple of key takeaways, as I said. One, we are held accountable. We are responsible of the program, but we are not in charge when it comes to the actual actions. The actions, or the fact that our responsibility is decreased, eventually create a reality where the attack surface is growing, where actual remediation is extremely difficult. It depended on others. And when we have newer type of vulnerabilities, new stakeholders to work with, new people to align to, our jobs just becomes just more and more impossible. And lastly, when we look at what is the thing that we are trying to achieve, or what we believe will be the tipping point of this problem, is first and foremost consolidation of data, taking all of these distributed pieces of data and putting them in one place. Secondly, associating them to ownership, apart from obviously making the data clearer, better prioritized, deduplicated, and so on. Finding the owner of a particular task, assigning it in an easy and comfortable way to this owner, and providing this owner with the best possible way to fix the problem. This is actually a fairly linear process, where first and foremost, vulnerabilities are a term that we need to kind of relieve ourselves from. Vulnerabilities are associated directly to CVEs in most cases. We're not talking only on CVEs. CVEs alone are not the only threat that is being posed from a postural perspective to the enterprise in the modern world. There are other stuff we as security people need to take care of from a risk perspective, from an operational perspective, and so on. And as we consolidate and then correlate and dedupe the data, enrich it with relevant data pieces, analyze it and prioritize it, once we have this golden piece of data, then we can orchestrate more, collaborate more, and report on the things we are actually resolving. As we look at it, or how we do it in Vulcan, fairly simple. We try to bring all of the different data pieces together. We take data from scanners, we take data from asset inventories. It provides us both the ownership data, the business impact data, and so on. We're trying to understand the context of the outside world, provide the level of analysis that can allow teams to eventually understand better and hopefully automatically what they need to resolve first, and then drive the process in the form of cutting tickets to the right people, providing remediation tools to the right people, providing reporting capabilities to the right people, in order to empower other teams to be better remediation agents. We look at consolidation for security, democratization for everyone else. Our job is to empower. Our job is to allow other people, the people who are responsible on remediation, to be successful. The more successful they are, the more supportive we are, the better the program will function, the more mature we will be, and honestly, the more risk we will reduce. That's the entire idea. There are many ways to do that, and we believe that Vulcan provides one of these ways. There are other ways in the market, as David said. We believe that it's all eventually rooted in consolidation of data, improving the way we observe this data, and assigning the data to the right person with the right tools to actually remediate. That's fairly how we read the reality. This is how we believe things should eventually be handled. And I'm going to pass it on back to David, both for some Q&A as well as further discussion. So David, back to you.
Oh, sorry, had to find the mute button. Thanks. That's always the problem, right? So we did have a question come in. I think we have another one too, but I'm on the answer screen now because I already answered it kind of in Zoom, but we'll talk about it just because I think it's important and so that everybody sees it. The question was, do you recommend a vulnerability scanning subscription or using a service provider for vulnerability scanning? And the answer, which, I've been a consultant now for 7 or 8 years, so this is going to be a very consulting answer of it depends. You may still need to spend a lot of time and effort assisting your service provider in getting all the information they need for coverage, credentials, exclusions, and working closely with the business. So if you do choose that subscription model, make sure that as part of your contract, you address those concerns specifically and how they can help you. And then as part of any POC you do, you measure their ability to engage with the business and IT and other stakeholders. Now, this is a common consulting thing too, where they bring in the A team for the POC, and then you get the B or the C team for the actual subscription service. So make sure you are clear with them that I want in the POC the team that is going to be helping us.
I would add to that, David, if I may.
Yeah.
I think that in many cases, when we talk about consultancies, and I think there are different methods to sell. We can be all inclusive about all consultancies. I've seen great ones. I've seen horrible ones. Same goes to vendors. Same goes to whatever. I think the big case around it is that as we outsource risk and vulnerability management, we think, or we live under the perception that the entire problem is being moved and outsourced, where the reality is that it is just impossible. What we can do is get help in the form of people to run the operational stuff, manage the scans, schedule the scans, and so on. But the analysis of the data, as well as putting the data into the context of our own infrastructure, is something that in most of the cases we can only do either by providing more data in to the service provider apart from the scanning data, or by relying on our own subjective knowledge of what is important and what is not, how our network is built, who is owning what is the cost of fixing something, how does it look in our own environment? Because in many cases, we stop at scanning, but we forget that everything that happens after scanning actually happens outside of our hands. We cannot have our service provider patch for us. We cannot have our service provider put up competency controls for us. So as long as we understand the division of labor and we know how to manage our expectations with the consultant in service, I mean, always choose the one that you feel best and you trust and so on, but it can work. I think where it usually fails is that when we expect things that are just impossible for consulting services to provide, like actually running the patching or putting things into context or using the things that are subjectively owned by us as their customers versus not. I also think that it's a matter of how big is your team and how big is your environment. If you're a one vulnerability assessment manager and you have 10,000 hosts and 100 million vulnerability instances to govern, you're lost. Go outsource. You won't hire people on time to get to where you need to go. If you have enough people, you might want to get some extra work, but it's always a matter of putting this into context as well.
Yeah, and really, the other thing to look at is what is the cost? Like, one thing that's interesting is the US government, the UK government, they both have subscription options for their different agencies where they can subscribe to scanning. So if you're not doing scanning, or if you really are, that's like kind of a capability that you provide, but you don't do a great job, you have poor quality results, lots of false positives and other issues with the scan results, then leveraging somebody that's doing it day in and day out for lots of people can maybe provide some benefit there. So that would be another reason to look at that. The other thing that it does is it insulates you a little bit from some of those problems. So if there still are problems with scanning, well, it's this third party's fault. It's not security's fault. And so we can partner with IT to help the service provider get better. And that insulates that relationship with IT a little bit. If we can get the scanning with limited or no increase in cost, either due to the fact that somebody else is funding it, like those government agencies that I talked about, or maybe these service providers get better licensing deals because they're doing it so much for so many people, then there might be some value there as well. I kind of chuckled when you mentioned that you can't have somebody do your patching for you, because I actually had a company that I worked with that tried that. And I don't know if they ever figured it out, but 6 months in, they were struggling because they had all the same problems that they had before, but less effective communication because there weren't the relationships there with the team members to help communicate to the owners of these assets and schedule any sort of remediation, make sure that they understood the maintenance procedures and how things were taken offline and brought online after patches and configuration changes. And so, yeah, that can be very, very difficult using somebody for that.
I agree.
All right. So what would you recommend for a PLC environment for scanning and finding vulnerabilities? I guess, I don't know, this might show my ignorance, but can you describe the PLC acronym, what that stands for?
It's a programmable logic controller. So OT,
Okay.
SCADA controllers. It's actually a question that, so I've used to be also involved in a business that does that. I believe that like there is a challenge in these type of environments when it comes to scanning, because most scanning is passive. Most scanning is being conducted by doing deep packet analysis of the protocol and trying to analyze from the protocol what is the firmware version of the PLC or of the OT environment. And in most cases, it's very, very, very hard to find and very dependent on the vendor. There are a couple that I think do that. One is Microsoft through their CyberX acquisition. Another one is Clarity, Nozomi. Generally, the big Tenable, I think, also do something like that through their Indigi acquisition. I think the big issue is that it's very hard to be active. So when you look at network scanning, most network scanners are sending WMI requests to Windows machines or trying to actively scan. Here, most scans are passive, and therefore they're bound and limited to what the protocol can provide you with. Modbus protocol, for example, doesn't necessarily provide you with a firmware version of a PLC. Very, very, very challenging problem. I agree here.
Yeah, another one that I've seen in that space. Now that you describe what is behind all of that, like IoT and OT, is Zingbox is another vendor, I guess. I don't know if you mentioned that one. But again, it's passive, right? It's looking at the network traffic and other things, similar to what kind of Nmap does to fingerprint the device. And once it can fingerprint the device and figure out the versioning based on how it's chatting on the network, then it can tell you if there's vulnerabilities, right? Because it's not with those types of environments, it's not like you're installing a whole bunch of random stuff on these things. It's pretty consistent, right? These controllers are going to have a specific set of software. So if you can figure out the version of the controller, then you can pretty much be confident that you know what's installed on there and can determine the vulnerabilities. Now,
Yeah.
Isabel's asked, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know. It's okay. Can move to the next one.
Yeah. Isabel asked about, I think she's asking about like the scanning that we do for those supply chain vulnerabilities. But if you have that software bill of materials already, you have your pom.xml, you have your package.json, is it really worth it to do all of that extra scanning if we already know what our apps are composed of? And I would say that by and large, that's correct. We know what's there, but what we don't always know is the correct upgrade path or the safe upgrade path, which some of these tools are getting into providing. Like, hey, maybe go from this version to this version and then to that version, or if you upgrade this one, then this other dependency is going to have issues, and they'll do a better job of pointing that out than we can analyze on our own. The other thing that I've seen is with the transitive dependencies, where this package itself is not vulnerable, but it includes this other open source software or this other package that's not listed in your SBOM, potentially, right? A lot of times it will determine those transitive dependencies, but if it doesn't, for whatever reason, some of the databases associated with these scanning tools can find those and associate the vulnerabilities with that transitive dependency so that you know and are aware of that risk as well. So I think there's some value there, but can we successfully get better at vulnerability management without scanning for vulnerabilities? I think that's true across the board, right? I'm not saying don't scan, but if you're just starting your program, instead of going out and finding your scanning tool first, maybe focus on what you know you're not patching or what you know you're not configuring, or getting your baselines in place first, and then in tandem be acquiring that scanning tool. But don't wait to focus on remediation until you have the scanning capability. So just a question I have for you, Yaniv, is what are some of the features that your customers are finding the most valuable in your product? Or what are they, and maybe what are they asking for, right? What are some features that you can talk about, maybe that you haven't released yet, but that a lot of your customers are asking for?
Excellent. So I think it all starts, again, depends on the maturity level of the customer, because when you're selling a platform versus a product, you're actually addressing multiple use cases that can serve multiple types of customers. I think that first and foremost today, when we talk with customers, the biggest pain is the fact that they have more scanners that are scanning the same things. The fact that now, unlike 5 to 6 years ago, our information is distributed versus consolidated. So the first thing organization wants to achieve, and what we find is the most useful, or the first thing they find is the most useful, is our ability to bring these pieces of data together and start by deduping the findings out of them. So saying that what your CrowdStrike endpoint vulnerability assessment scanner is detecting is the same vulnerability you're getting from your Tenable or from your Wiz or Orca. These things basically reduces the cognitive overload, both for the security teams, but more importantly, allows security to then assign a task that is singular versus duplicated tasks. This is one. The second thing is the ownership piece. The fact that we have the ability to map an owner to an asset and then connect that to a vulnerability is a game changer, especially for large organizations who are working with multiple teams across multiple geographies, because this allows them in turn to automate many of these notification processes directly to their ServiceNow or their Jira or other stuff. The fact that our product connects bidirectionally to both the IDSMs and the notification systems of the other teams, as well as directly ties the information from the scanners and the asset inventories together, helps them then basically operate at scale and spare themselves with all the manual effort that is eventually associated with finding the owner, assigning the task, managing the SLAs, and making sure data is there. So these are the current two futuristic stuff that we are working on. One, we're seeing new type of assets and new type of vulnerabilities are just becoming of interest. One is APIs specifically as an asset, taking an API as an asset and trying to manage the risks that are associated to them. Second one is SaaS applications. They present different dependencies, different types of risks. An overprivileged user in your Salesforce is a vulnerability. A misconfiguration in your ServiceNow is a vulnerability. These are things that are more advanced, but we perceive them as just anything else. If you have all your customer data in Salesforce and you are providing misconfigured or overprivileged users access to this data, then in turn, these users can eventually take or be an access point to an attacker to getting access to this data, just like a privilege escalation CVE or a remote code execution CVE might have done that as well. So mapping and tying these data pieces together into the platform, extracting data from tools like Obsidian, Adaptive Shield, and so on, are things that we hear about a lot. And another thing is what we call cross-attack surface attack path analysis. The ability to tell an attack story from findings of different types of tools in a way that makes sense and show an attack path story that is a bit more broader. Let's take again this SaaS example. If I have a user that sits or uses a laptop, and we know there is a vulnerability on this laptop that based on the MITRE attack framework is associated with phishing. and we can say or see that in the phishing exercises, this specific user has a tendency to open phishing emails, and this user also has high privileges in your AWS or your Salesforce. Now we can describe an attack path that is more risky in other cases where the machine didn't have the vulnerability that was found by Qualys, or the user didn't have excessive privileges as was found with Obsidian, for that matter. The ability to tie these things together and put them in context that is a broader context than just here is a CVE, or here is a DAST finding, or here's a CWE that is important part of the OWASP top 10, are things that we believe tell a better story, cut through the noise, allow us to pinpoint the areas that are the weakest link in this attack chain, and eventually provide better ways and better path for security to assess their risk. These are the things we're working on as we look forward a year or two ahead with the platform and product.
All right, very cool. For those SaaS-based vulnerabilities, is that something, it sounds like maybe you're integrating with other products that are identifying these risks, or are you actually developing some capabilities to identify those risks on your own?
It's a great question. We will never identify vulnerabilities. This is not our business. We trust the scanners to do that across the different attack surfaces. We take them and put them into context. Okay.
So you're developing the plugins to integrate with all those different cloud access security brokers and other SaaS assessment tools, along with, all of the other identification tool sets, right?
Yeah,
to provide that consolidated view.
I was thinking about it, but as a perception, what gave birth to Vulcan is the notion that the cybersecurity market is a secondary market to the IT market. Every IT trend, it could be containers, serverless, cloud, SaaS, eventually creates a sub-ecosystem of security tools to support it. We today, 20 years ago, we were very, very, very focused on detecting alerts that notified us on active breaches and responding to them. We started building technologies that were peripheral to the different attack surfaces we managed, and that in turn gave birth to a SIM and SOAR and created the SOC. We are experiencing the same trend now when it comes to posture and vulnerabilities. From singular vulnerability assessment scanners on a singular type of infrastructure, we are now seeing a proliferation of security tools that are scanning and finding particular posture issues that might result in an incident. The one thing that we have in common to all of them is that A, these are risks, these are not active threats, so we treat them in a different way. We have to work through bureaucracy, enterprise bureaucracy, to get them resolved. And secondly, in most cases, we are not the one to resolve them. We are dependent on other people from the enterprise to resolve them. So as we look at DSPM as a new category that comes in, that detects data silos in the cloud that are mismanaged, for example, an encrypted data silo might be a vulnerable data silo. We need to operate through the DevOps team or engineering team and cut them a ticket, or task them with the process of building the application in an encrypted way. This is the modern patching. We're patching the data set versus patching the software. So these type of things, we don't even need to call this patching anymore, because it's not a patch. It's just a change of configuration or behavior or architecture of software. But all of them eventually result in the same thing. We are tasking people that are not security folks with security-driven tasks in order to assure that a risk will not exist anymore and an incident will not happen in the future. Our take is, if we'll do that correctly, we will dramatically, obviously, reduce the number of incidents, and we will eventually be living in a more secure world. And hopefully, if we can do it effectively and efficiently and apply the right tools to do that and communicate with our counterparts well around that and give them the tools to resolve that quickly, either remediate or mitigate, we are practically solving a huge, huge, huge chunk of the overall cybersecurity problem.
Yeah, I agree. I think one thing that hit me when you're talking there was like, eventually, this isn't something, there's no silver bullet to vulnerability management. There's no quick fix. It's going to take time. I actually worked with one of my clients on a vulnerability that they couldn't resolve because they required an old version of some software. And once they recognized that this was a large percentage of their backlog, they put in place a project to fix the issue, right? So that they could get off of that software, upgrade an application, so they could get off of that software. And it took them a good 6 or 7 months, right, to solve that one problem. But once they resolved it, their backlog reduced by 4 million vulnerabilities overnight, just because of that one thing that couldn't be resolved. And then, you know, what's the next biggest thing? And then what's the next biggest thing? And it might take months to get through some of those. Having that ownership detail so that we can have the conversations with the right people to figure out what those problems are, right? In addition to assigning out the vulnerabilities that can be fixed right now is, I think, like you said, very, very important. All right, we had another comment about, you know, looking in the IoT OT space, SCADA, looking for the vendors that maybe specialize in that kind of infrastructure, and see what capabilities they have. A lot of vendors are now adding in vulnerability scanning capabilities, even if they haven't traditionally done that. It's becoming a little bit more common these days. And so you might find something in one of those other tools. Now, this isn't a scanning tool, but another tool that I've seen that specializes maybe in industry specific infrastructure, that's more for the asset management side, is IBM's Maximo solution, where they actually have specific asset management capabilities for, let's say, the airline industry or some specific industry. So that's something to look into as well. Not saying specifically that product, but the products that fit your industry or your niche. But I think we're at the end of our time for today. I appreciate all of you joining us, and Yaniv for your participation. We've had some really great insights, and I was really interested to find out more about your product, and appreciate everybody's time today, and have a great rest of your day. Turn the time back over.
Thank you very much.
Mary Lynn.